Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good evening to this Berlage keynote given by Pedro Picharch. He is an architect and contemporary musician who lives and works in Madrid, occupying a somewhat tangential position within traditional architectural practice. His investigations focus on the interrelations between society, contemporary culture, and media. It's a pleasure to have Pedro here to give tonight's keynote in conjunction with the masterclass that he's been leading for this fortnight entitled The Event as Architecture. This is the first Berlage keynote of the academic year, which brings together emerging and leading designers and thinkers to present their work, which is, well, at least what we consider at the Berlage at the forefront of design practice. So thank you for being here with us. We look forward to your lecture. Thank you for the 2 weeks, eh?
So thanks very much, Salomon, for the introduction, and also thanks very much for the invitation, for doing this lecture, and also for teaching here during these past 2 weeks at the Berlage, doing the design masterclass. That's I do here the advertisement. We are doing tomorrow the kind of presentation of the results here at kind of 4-ish. I don't know what time yet. So I would also like to extend my gratitude to both TU Delft and to the Berlage itself. Not just by the opportunity to give this lecture today, but also because it's a pleasure for me to come back to Delft after 14 years, as I studied here a long time ago, and it was extremely important in my career to pass through TU Delft and through the whole kind of environment and framework, intellectual framework around TU Delft for these years. So today I am going to be sharing with you 6 projects from my professional practice. As you can see, each of them has a kind of a different scale, from the scale of the object, going up into the scale of the interior, and scaling up to the scale of the building, the neighborhood, the city, and society. But before going into that, I would like to introduce very quickly 3 concepts that somehow have informed my professional practice since the very beginning in 2017, sort of. And the first of one is a condition or kind of an approach in which, from the very beginning, we have tried to define an abstract language that could become a tool. No? An abstract language, a very kind of technical, black and white line drawing, which could become not just a representational language, but also kind of a constructive language and an architectural language itself, by which we could define projects which understand architecture as buildings, as the built environment, such as this plan, which is the plan of a kind of concert hall in the south of Portugal, but also that could allow us to kind of incorporate into architecture many other layers of information that are not architectural per se, but that somehow can be represented and can be graphied with this type of language, and that somehow by that approach, that kind of technical abstract language approach, we could incorporate this kind of economical information, cultural information, or even ecological information into the language. Then the second concept is an approach to our projects in which we understand them as kind of medium and devices, and this deals with to an idea of the dissolution of programs. So somehow we, and in the project I'm going to be sharing with you today, we kind of detach from this kind of modern heritage in which form and program have a relation in the sense of typology, and we kind of try to criticize that by examples of projects in which the assigned form to a program is not so relevant, but what is relevant for us are the kind of architectural conditions and qualities that can be performed within it. And finally, the third concept that is constantly kind of informing the practice and that is embedded into the DNA of what we do is a condition of the erase of differentiation, or this idea and this concept of the oxymoron, by which we always address most of the projects that we work with, being very critical with apparent opposite terms, such as, for example, life and work, or such as machine and organism. And we try to emphasize on the idea that in contemporary society, these concepts that by heritage of the modern project have been presented to us as things that are completely opposites. Somehow we believe that they are not so opposite and that they are interwoven with each other. And these three concepts has led us to kind of an approach, a constant approach in the practice of a critique of the typology. So moving ahead into the projects, these 6 projects that I'm going to be presenting, as I mentioned before, they operate in kind of 4 different scales. So somehow, first of them is going to be operating in the scale of the object, the following 2 in the scale of the building, the following 2 in the scale of city, and the final one in the scale of a society. And with this, we are trying to kind of demonstrate 4 critiques. The first of them, 4 critiques to the concept of typology, or the typological architecture, from the material, from the program, from the form, and from time, so that each of these scales, somehow growing up in a scale, is going to be trying to emphasize or trying to state a certain type of critique to the typology. So the first project that I'm going to be presenting is a project that is somehow ongoing. We were commissioned, or we won a competition, and then we were commissioned 3 years ago, the design of Arco, which is the contemporary art fair of Madrid. And it's something that we are going to be continuing for a couple more of editions. And since the very beginning, we started with analyzing like the conventional approach to the art fair, which belongs to this kind of layout. It's kind of a quite kind of shopping mall-oriented layouts with an scheme that operates in kind of corridors with big kind of blocks. And we tried to propose from the very beginning of the project 2 migrations. No? The first migration was this idea of trying to shift from the fair space to the museum space, so that also this deals not just with the pathways, but with the notion on how you approach and how you relate to art. And then the second idea was kind of a second migration that we proposed, and is a migration from the generic interior of the fair to kind of an encapsulated urbanism of a city of galleries. Not understanding that these type of projects, regardless of happening in an interior, they are so huge and they have such a kind of a bigness scale that they can perform as interior urbanisms. So for that idea, we started to work with the galleries themselves, but with the physical galleries themselves, no? With the plan of the galleries that kind of show their art, and that go and travel to Madrid to be present in this art fair. And we started to design a series of strategies by which those plans could be simplified and could be constructed with the generic materials of the fairs. And therefore, we later on we did this kind of, or we progressed it into applying this technique to all the plans of the galleries, so that we could argue that the plan of this city of galleries of Arco, this encapsulated urbanism, could become kind of a gathering or an interior city in which each gallery was exhibiting in a exact one-to-one mock-up or replica of their own architecture, with a common, totally generic type of materialization, which is the kind of white wall board of the fair. So we have been applying this kind of technique and this approach to the fair, understanding that this approach to the layout could offer us the possibility to understand that these interiors are kind of domesticated urbanisms, by which they are somehow in between the qualities of an exterior space and an interior space, and also of a kind of a public space and a private space. But what is more important for us in this project is not so much that the scale of the encapsulated urbanism, but much more the idea of object-oriented urbanism that we have been working with the project. So we have been deliberately working with fair materials and kind of materials that are somehow quite ugly, no? Such as this kind of fair carpet, which is like the cheapest kind of super ugly material in art fairs, and somehow trying to emphasize and to visualize that material with non-conventional uses of the material. For example, applying them to the walls, and also, for example, the kind of lightning trusses, using it in another way so that they can become part of the kind of language of the fair itself. And therefore, the whole project has been pivoting around this idea of the object-oriented urbanism that tries to visualize all the different type of construction techniques and materials of this kind of fair synthetic organism, trying to position ourselves just a little bit apart from the architectural design and trying to address that our position there is much more of an infrastructural curation. So in this sense, I'm going to be here, for example, sharing with you the plan of one fragment of the fair, of the fragment of the public programs of the fair, and how it has evolved from 3 years ago to 1 year ago or 2 years ago and last edition. No? So for us, it's not so much important here the kind of formal differentiation of all these plans, but actually how the materials and how the different construction techniques and systems and also working methods with the builders and so on have been informing the form. No? So the form has not been so much driven by the program, but much more by the materialization using this kind of aluminum insulation materials they use for facilities, or using again the carpet for kind of acoustic insulation from some pavilions, or using kind of these kind of geotextiles for creating the background of the fair, so that all together these materials start to construct this kind of fair ecosystem, stating that there is kind of an artificial ecology behind the fair that does not understand ecology, such as in a much more conventional way, but understand that the fair itself is kind of an ecosystem in which these old materials and construction techniques inform the project. No? So, for example, this is the plan of one of these main pavilions, the pavilion of its kind of an auditorium, and the form of it has not so much been defined by the program itself, but much more because of the construction techniques and the assembling methodologies. No? In this case, the whole pavilion is developed with a structure that hangs from above, so that we can see this kind of hanging poles, and the whole pavilion is not so much laid on the floor, but somehow is hung from above, as we can see with the trusses and so on. And that is the reason, because of the kind of geometry of it. No? But also the same project, for example, was developed in the following edition with a totally, completely different form, which was a result of the type of material we were applying here. We were wrapping the whole piece, so it's not so important for us this kind of composition of the plan, but what is much more important is the kind of material that wrapped it, which is this is a net that is usually used to kind of break the reverb sound in stadiums, and that we were using here in order to generate kind of an insulation, acoustic insulation skin for the activity that was happening inside. No? So, as I was saying, all these not just materials, but techniques of assembly are the ones that have been defining the kind of shapes and the materialization of the projects. And in this case, for example, we were not just applying them in terms of the qualification of the spaces, but also in terms of more kind of longer logics of the fair. In here on the right, we can see that we were applying kind of this material. I don't know how you call it. They are like kind of bubbles that you blow when you order kind of something from Amazon. Sometimes they come inside this, no? So they are these materials that we were using them to kind of wrap around a whole piece, and that at the end of the fair galleries were removing them and using them to wrap the art pieces in order to send the art pieces that were sold. No? So that we were thinking in a kind of a bigger and a wider logic of this kind of fair ecosystem in which this material is not wasted but somehow is injected into another process. And the same, for example, with the trusses, no? These kind of rented trusses that we were using as or inventing this kind of type of furniture that was applied in many ways throughout the fair, using also and designing with it the space of the food court for the face. So stepping up on a scale, the following project is a project that we have been developing for the past 5 years in a very intermediate way due to kind of political concerns. The project was a part of a competition that we won in 2020 for the restoration of a cinema in the south of Spain, which was part of kind of a complex of two buildings. The one on the left is kind of a building from the late 19th century, which was the cinema itself. It used to be a market, but then it was transformed to a cinema. And the building on the right it was designed by the same architect with a kind of a modern movement approach, and it was dwelling. So basically, they had two types of heritage preservation requirements. The cinema we needed to keep as it was inside, and also on the outside, but the dwelling building, it could be demolished inside, but we needed to keep on or to preserve the facade. So the project also, in a kind of a wider scale, it offers us the possibility to kind of address a kind of a wider necessity of the city of having kind of a civic big space. So we operate with the pre-existence, kind of emptying the interior of the dwelling building, but restoring the other. And the whole project was just developed around a piece that we were positioning from above of a big truss, from which kind of a cube was hanging and inhabiting the interior of the space of the former dwelling building. So as I was mentioning before, in a kind of urban approach, the building offered this possibility of connecting two squares that are very important for the city, but somehow they are not so big, so that by means of trying to make the ground floor of the project completely public in a kind of an OLI approach, we could somehow understood that these three elements could become three courtyard, three plazas, no, or three squares. So this was somehow the idea. If we were doing kind of a section of the building, we were preserving the whole space of the main theater or cinema theater, and then just by means of adding this kind of roof structure, we were also adding there more square meters. So instead of the competitors of the competition, they were putting everything in the second building. We could generate this lower plan that was much more kind of public and kind of empty in a sense, and giving much more program by the thickness of and the height of the upper structure of the roof. So somehow the scheme is this one. No? The scheme is organized around kind of a skin, historical skin, and then just positioning on top of it and space that was adding spaces for musicians and spaces for this kind of cultural center that is kind of hanging from above. So in that sense, the kind of programmatic approach to it is very simple. It has one main room and then certain kind of public spaces and service spaces. But for us, the organization of the project was not so much driven by the program, but driven by the structure itself. So in here, the city where it is positioned, Cartagena, is a city that they have a lot of kind of Roman ruins, and we had to do a series of tests, and we found out that the foundations for the new element that we were adding on top, because the facade didn't have enough capacity to hold the truss. The only foundations that we could do were these ones. No, so that the structural support of the whole building needed to be positioned very weirdly and with a kind of a strange approach by which we started to coordinate also circulation elements on vertical circulation cores on it, on 8 points, and those 8 points are the points that somehow also define the structure of the above truss. And that decision of defining the layout of the plan from the possibility of foundation and the relation with the truss is the one that kind of drives the whole composition of the plan. As I was saying before, the plan, the low level is kind of a level which is extremely public and that allows, whenever there is no a performing event, to kind of open everything to kind of the public. And then the upper levels, on a side, they are very different. On a side, we have the hugeness and the vast space of the main hall, but on the other side, we have this kind of little cube that coordinates different type of multipurpose room with a kind of a in-between space from the outside and the inside, in between this kind of second facade that we are doing inside. And then finally, the last level is this level inside the truss, is this level inside the structure that we are giving as an extra square meters, which are basically a lot of spaces for playing music and also for offices and so on. Also, this idea of the horizontal element on the top of it was offering us the possibility to kind of do also events on the roof. So these cores, these vertical cores that I was explaining before, they reach the rooftop and also offer the possibility of appropriation of the rooftop. Going inside of the main hall, then we also were trying to operate with a series of structures or strategies that were kind of allowing us not just to have this space as a purely kind of theatrical space, but that could generate a series of scenarios. So we could use it as a standard cinema room, but we could also divide it from the third stance in order to generate two spaces. It could also be used for kind of a rock concert or something more when we put back the chairs, and also for exhibitions. No? And then the final kind of element that was extremely important in the project as well was this idea of preservation of the main facade. And we tried to went farther there, and we didn't want to preserve the kind of exterior elevation of it, but we also wanted to define a series of strategies for preservation of the inner elevation of the facade, so that we could also somehow materialize the whole story of the dwellings there. No? So generating by means of detaching the new piece from the main facade, we were also making visible all this interior or all these domestic interiors that we are keeping in the final project. So this kind of a strategy of adding this element from a construction point also was kind of given two problematics to solve. One was the relation with the main facade of the cinema, and the other one was the relation with the secondary building, which are completely different. No, so with the main building, the facade still has some kind of a structural capacity. So the relation is as this one. No, we are separating ourselves, but somehow we have to climatize underneath, and the relation between the truss and the facade, they collaborate with each other. No, but in the building of the dwellings is a much more complex situation, because the main facade cannot support any capacity. So what we are doing here is a quite complex system in which we are rigidizing the facade because it's kind of standing by itself, and then adding some elements that are transmitting horizontal efforts, but then the whole piece can move together up and down because they are somehow articulated, no? So that this whole element is the element that is somehow coordinating the different structural efforts and the different foundation capacities of the wall that is not going to move so much, of the facade, and the inner piece, which is expected to kind of move in the future down and therefore needs to be articulated. Going a little bit more in a scale, the third project I'm sharing relates to dwelling and relates to housing. Is the result, again, of a competition that we got a second prize many years ago for the government of Russia, and they were seeking for standard layouts for social housing and collective housing. So in here we started the project with a very strategical approach. We analyzed that in the kind of traditional concept of the conventional city, dwelling and public programs are completely detached from each other, so that public programs are usually in place either in urban spaces or in civic buildings. No? So we tried to explode that and to inject those domesticated pieces of public uses into the block of the residential block, generating two models in which the whole space was kind of a layout in which was the result of adding a whole mass of apartments to a series of public capsules coordinated by vertical cores. No? So we apply this into three layouts, or the three types. The first of them is the gallery, which is obviously a very continuous space in which the corridor was coordinating the relation between this kind of vertical, horizontal the public space of the corridor, together with the vertical cores and the access to these public capsules which holded urban spaces, and that somehow all this kind of horizontal element was also coordinated by the vertical cores in order to touch the ground floor, which is this one, and to allow the permeability of citizens to these other type of pieces. No? So the result was this. No? The result was kind of a complex building that behind a very extremely and deliberately generic type of facade, we were offering a series of kind of an interior city, of a series of combinations of different type of apartments for different type of users, and that every now and then we were removing either an apartment or a part of an apartment in order to inject one of these public capsules that were accessible with the corridor behind. And the result was something like that. No, this is something that we were trying to generate, that kind of back elevation of the project as something extremely public and extremely permeable. And somehow the same technique was applied, and the same strategy was applied to the other two types. One of the tower, in which the whole sequence of public spaces were organized around the main central core, and this allowed us to propose again a kind of a scheme in which, behind a very generic type of facade, we were organizing a huge diversity of apartments, and they were all accessible by a central core, a central spine, vertical spine that was also giving access to the public spaces. And finally, the third type was kind of a mix between both of them. It's the kind of the block section in which we were having in some features from both the gallery, the kind of a lineal element, coordinating also the vertical cores, but also this central condition of the tower that again was materialized regardless of a kind of a different form or of a different layout. The strategy behind it was also revealing this kind of generic facade with a series of internal capsules and offering the possibilities of combination of different type of apartments. So the apartments were actually a whole big range of apartments. We were requested to design the kind of colored ones, but we offered different variations to them in relation to a series of sociological approaches that we did, so that we didn't approach the apartment so much from the specific square area requirements, so the square meter per program, but we approach we design different variations according to different social types and different combinations of families or different critique of the family core. And again, obviously, we had to do kind of a catalog of the public spaces, which was extremely important to do it kind of in a very pragmatic and precise way, because they needed, regardless of their looking to them now very strange shapes, we needed to design them according to a series of patterns and a series of modules, so that they could be either injected into the structure of the layout, or they could be injected into the removal strategies of certain pieces from the apartments. And the result behind this kind of apparent complexity system was this one, in which we also, through the materialization and through the approach to kind of, this was the first project in which we started to do rendering. We wanted to emphasize on the kind of very neutral materialization behind a kind of a complex system, so that the complexity of the system and the complexity of the strategy didn't require a complexity in materials. No? Moving up on a scale, this following project is a project for the New Cyprus Museum. The New Cyprus Museum was result again of an international competition in which, again, we got second prize and not first prize. So this competition was extremely important because it's the first one, it's the kind of the competition that established the practice as something more serious or kind of business oriented. Until then, I was doing competition, I was doing project, but this is the first kind of serious project with kind of a whole team. And the project was started with a brief from the jury, which was the definition of an archaeological museum for whole Cyprus in the city of Nicosia. So mainly the target was to define this archaeological museum, which was the National Museum, and how the idea or the question that the brief of the competition raised was how to define a museum that gathers 12,000 years of history. But for us, this question was much more important, no? How to redefine such an architectural typology or such an architectural type of the museum. So for answering to that question, we end up with this project, a project which apparently is very complex in its form, but somehow it's not so much addressed from form itself, but from a strategy that tries to establish a critique of the typology of the museum as a kind of a neutral space for generic configurations for specific art pieces. No? So this layout respond to a very radical statement in which we divided the project in 3 layers. So first of all, we had a layer which was the public floor, an extremely open public space, which we stated from the very beginning that everything was going to be museum space, was going to be in the ground floor and was going to be accessible. Then a second layer, which were the closed pieces, which were both public and private specific pieces, all with different range of formal approaches, but which somehow they gather very specific programs that needed to be hermetic and secluded. And finally, all of it was kind of covered by an infrastructural roof that had a very generic form of almost a circle, which was a kind of an abstract gesture in order to gather the complexity below it. So as mentioned, the project was an extremely big project with a lot of complexity of programmatic approach and circulations that we needed to solve. But in order to solve that, the approach was maybe not so much from the whole picture itself, but somehow from a much more, from the program itself, but much more from a whole, or from a further picture, from a very much more metropolitan approach. So in this sense, we didn't start working with the space of the museum nor the spaces of the pieces, but somehow we started working with the landscape and the connections to the city and the kind of the urban approach of this museum, of the museum, and how it could become a space for the city. And in that sense, we started doing a series of this kind of atlas of urban infrastructures, so a landscape of islands, which were kind of urban elements that were included in the landscape around, and that could offer functions, or not so much function, but spaces and scenarios, scenographies for certain activities. And this design was the design that was driven, the kind of urban approach, so that somehow the interior of the building and the kind of interior of the museum was not so much decided as a different type of strategy, but somehow, as you can see, the site plan and the architectural plan, so that the architectural plan is just a mere zoom-in with more resolution of the site plan, which is somehow giving much more resolution in a smaller scale for the architectural requirements of the interior, but that somehow the DNA and the genetics of that interior museographic space is a consequence of the exterior landscape. So that if we remove the facade of the building, somehow we don't see a clear distinction between the exterior space and the urban space with the interior space of the museum, and somehow that facade is a consequence of two very basic facts or very basic requirements. One is a requirement of, obviously, of kind of environmental requirement, that the pieces needed to kind of insulation from the environment and kind of climatic control condition. And the second one, obviously, is economy, because they needed to kind of charge a ticket for the visitor. So going into this, as I was mentioning before, the whole space of the museographic space was the result of a series of strategies by which we were designing, actually first, a series of public pieces that each of them have a very specific form because they belong to the requirements of that functions, a series of private pieces, and then after putting both of them on inside the kind of area of the project, the museum space was not so much design, but was a consequence of the collision between the externality of the exterior of the urban space and all these kind of buildings within the buildings that we were positioning there, no? So that the whole space, as sometimes in our cities when we are kind of adding architectures, the urban space is kind of a poche in between, something that is not so much designed and decided, but is a kind of a shape that is found. So in this sense, we tried to take that, and we were probably, like most of the teams obviously in the competition were not, were obviously starting to design the museum and then the secondary spaces. We did completely the opposite. We designed the secondary spaces and then the museum spaces, and therefore we didn't win the competition. But that offered us a very interesting approach to a very interesting museographic approach, which is this one that I'm trying to show here in this AXO, by which the museum space was not so much coordinated by a sequence of rooms, one after the other one. No, as we trace back the typology of the museum to the pinacotheques and so on, so that you go from one space to the other, seeing kind of thematic rooms. But somehow we could understand that this whole kind of archaeological museum was a part of the city, and that the kind of compartmentation was not coordinating the different areas, but the different areas were much more coordinated by kind of devices, no? So such as furniture, but also by kind of landscape accidents, no? And that obviously offered one of the possibilities that was kind of going from one section to the other one in a kind of chronological approach, no? So going from the early Bronze Age, Middle Bronze Age, and so on, but also offer us a strategy to define a series of museums within the museums. We provided in the competition kind of 8 configurations, but in here I'm showing a couple of them, so that we could somehow go through the museum as if it was a city, no? As if when we visit cities and we come to Delft first time, no? You go to the main square, then you go to the Oude Kerk, you come to TU Delft and so on, but you don't go and you don't travel around the whole city, no? You go to certain points. So we could design a museum which was the Museum for the Ancient Cities and Archaeological Excavations, but with the same layout also offer a museum of social governance and politics, or a museum of archaeological highlights for the very lazy tourists that only want to see like the highlights. And then the rest of the project was designed through the definition of the private pieces. I'm not going to go so much in depth into here, but just to give you a glimpse, each of the pieces were having a different approach. For example, one of them was the one that was holding the whole archive and also the laboratory. So in here, we were kind of offering two types of structure, one for the inner cage and another type of structure for the secondary kind of a loop around it. So it was kind of a structure inspired or deliberately almost copied from early OMA project from Karlsruhe, no? These kind of trusses, one on top of each other, that liberates some floors and that have kind of an inner structure. And for each of the different pieces, we were offering different schemes, so that we were also emphasizing this idea of the museum, of the city within the museum, no? Or the city within the building, no? That each element of the project was conceived as a building itself, and the whole building was not just conceived as a building, but as the result of a kind of a small neighborhood of a kind of a small city, no? And then the same for the public spaces. An sphere, which was a conference hall, the library for a specialized library for researchers, also some educational areas, a gift shop, in which this was the only non-new piece, which was kind of a restoration of a former element. And then a kind of something that we call the Zeppelin, which was kind of a structure for virtual reality experiences that the museum was eager to have at that time. And finally, just to quickly mention the third layer, as you remember, the project was defined by that kind of open ground floor of the museum, the rest of the pieces, and then the infrastructural roof. The infrastructural roof somehow had, again, a form that was not so much designed, but was found, in the sense that, as you can see, the trusses and the structures that define all the kind of grid of the roof, they are not parallel, so that they get thicker or thinner, and that thickness and thinness responds to the diagram of forces and capacities that they needed, no? So that we are doing a thicker truss in the space or in the moment that we need more structure, and we are doing a thinner truss in the moment that we require less structure. No? So the result of the project, that complexity that I was addressing at the very beginning, was not so much something that was designed as a target or as a name of the project, but somehow that was found by the addition of a whole series of small complexities. No? So that in here we can see how they all relate to each other, the ground, open floor, all the different pieces, and then the kind of infrastructural roof and the relation between the interior and the exterior that we were trying to address with the model. Going to the final two projects, they are kind of they jump into a wider and bigger scale. This project is a project that we we won a competition of Europan, actually, in 2021, so Europan 16, 2 editions ago, in Aalst, a city in the outskirts of, well, kind of going from Brussels to Ghent. So it's a project that we started and somehow has been ongoing. And this project somehow with this project we were emphasizing on an idea that the project already had the scale of a huge urban site, but we were trying to address that the project was kind of a urban prototype that could extend its influence to other elements of the city. No? So this project is located in the left, and somehow it is, I don't know if I can point with this. Yeah, fantastic. So it's kind of positioned here, and somehow it is in between two infrastructure, a natural infrastructure, which is this kind of river, and a kind of an artificial infrastructure, which is the train tracks. So somehow we saw the opportunity that those two infrastructure could coordinate some of the influence of the project into other sites of not just the city, but in 3 scales. So from an infrastructural scale, we thought that the project could become kind of a logistic trigger that could position itself as a kind of as a node of a further kind of network of other sites that had the same type of approach or that were in the same sort of development and that could be feeding each other. From an environmental scale, we understood that the Dender River could become somehow an architectural device that could help the project to have a wider scale and become an ecological distributor of a series of regeneration natural strategies that I will introduce later on. And then from a social scale, from a kind of a much more somehow also local scale, the project could become a programmatic activator in the sense that it could offer place and space for certain activities of other spaces that we have been researching that didn't have enough space and that can go into this space. So somehow the project, as I was mentioning, the aim of the project, which this is the plan of the project, could become kind of a urban prototype for the whole municipality of Aalst. But our approach was, we again try to here criticize the kind of our attitude towards urban design, and somehow instead of trying to have an approach of building a context, we instead were proposing to curate a context. And in order to do that, we started doing a series of strategies that were coordinated on time, so operating with existing urban frame, and first of all, doing a series of regeneration strategies that were mainly confined within the boundaries of the heritage buildings that needed to be preserved in the center of the plot. These kind of elements that are kind of former factories, and then afterwards, when those regeneration strategies would be accomplished, those programs that would be successful, that had been tested there would be defining these kind of architectural artifacts on the periphery of the project, and later on they would inform the materialization of a series of connection elements, and finally a series of activation devices. And in the meantime, and during all this process, we will try to operate defining and giving a qualification to a series of cohesion urban spaces in between, so that the final result of it, the apparent complexity or the apparent formal complexity of the master plan, is just the addition and the superposition of a series of more simple layers. But for us, there's also a kind of another layout that is not so much architectural, but it's somehow ecological, which is that we have been working with a series of regeneration of strategies in terms of a series of a catalog of vegetation which is endemic from the area, and trying to operate with these ecologies as architectural devices, no? So that somehow we have been trying to refer that by the introduction of this vegetation, not just in the public open spaces, but also in some sort of semi-interior spaces, we could generate also as a gradient of ambience and a gradient of atmospheres that somehow would be defining a different type of zoning, no? A zoning that is not so much relying on architectural conventional elements such as walls and ceilings and kind of boxes, but that somehow we are doing compartmentation, no? But not with walls, but with vegetation. So somehow that approach needed an ecological infrastructure to kind of overlay to the architectural infrastructure, and that was this one, no? So this is this type of extremely boring but very beautiful document that is the plan of all the pumping of all the pipes and water vapors that are giving and providing water to the different plants that are going to be planted in the exterior, but also the watering of the soil and so on. No? And this is kind of has a consequence, which is the irrigation plan. No, the irrigation plan that ecological infrastructure and that kind of water infrastructure is forming and is transforming also the soil and the lower element. No? So in that sense, for us, with this approach of a migration from building a context to creating a context, the final result of the project is not so relevant for us. So the final form of it is not so relevant. But what is relevant is actually this, no, like the timeline. So we could state that this is the main plan of the project, which is not so much developed in a kind of a cartographic way, no? So that everything is positioned in its geographical position, but somehow it's much more topological, and that somehow starts here. We were extremely naive, and we won the competition in 2021, and we thought that we were going to be starting in 2022, and we haven't started anything at all at this moment, no? So, but the whole idea is that the whole project is established throughout this kind of timeline in which a series of strategies, both from architectural regeneration strategies and ecologies and so on, are going to be coordinated in order to arrive to the final image of the project, which is this one. And then finally, the last project I'm sharing today is kind of growing in scale, and it's a project we did again for a competition 2020 almost, during 2 years kind of, for Germany, for the Berlin municipality, actually for kind of a holding between the Berlin municipality and Berlin-Brandenburg state. And with this project, we took the chance of using the project was, we're going to explain it a little bit further now here. So the project was, they were aiming to define a model of growth for the city of Berlin for the following 50 years. So the competition was held in 2020, and they wanted to have kind of a strategy on how Berlin-Brandenburg could grow in the following 50 years until 2070. So for such a purpose, we took the chance to revisit the model of the archipelago, which for us was extremely important because actually my graduation thesis was inspired in Unger's archipelago, which was in Berlin. My graduation thesis was much more approached from a speculation point of view, and this one was much more approached from a very pragmatic point of view. So we were trying to see how the archipelago model or the archipel model could offer a possibility of growth of the city by intensifying a series of islands and a series of points. I am not going to go so much in depth into the kind of territorial approach, which was developed through. I would like to share with you 3 of the different islands that we developed much further, because we took the chance to somehow challenge the notion of the typology, of the type, of the urban type in each of them. No? So for each of these islands, we were trying to juxtapose 2 new typological approaches or new 2 types of urban spaces that were the result of emerging phenomena that we were identifying at the time. No? So the first island is Nieuw-Zuidkruis, which is the second biggest station in Berlin. The other island was operating with Tegel Airport that was going to be unused the following year, and now it's empty. And the third island was operating with the periphery, with a suburb called Koning Wusterhausen. So somehow the first of them was operating with a notion of a site which was extremely congested. Second island was operating with a site which was empty within the city, and the third one was operating with the future of the city and how the city can grow to the suburbs. So in that sense, we were extremely radical in the approach to the competition. We decided, instead of doing huge kind of panels with a lot of information as the teams that won the competition, which were urbanists, most of them, what we did was kind of a very radical approach in which we designed also the panels from 3 main documents. The first of them was kind of a huge AXO, the second of them was a kind of a huge rendering, and the third of them was a huge plan. So by these 3 documents, we were stating on the first of them, the huge axle, we were referring to the kind of architectural design of how the city was going to be looking like in 2070. With the render, we were trying to emphasize on the idea on how it was going to be materialized. And with the plan, we were trying to give the strategies and trying to be precise on how it was going to be developed. So basically, in the 3 projects, we were operating with the same strategy of kind of black and white architectural language, in which we were using this black hatching technique in order to show, in this case, everything that belongs to the first type, which is commuting urbanisms. No, so all the kind of urbanisms that are generated as a consequence of transit and transport infrastructures. And the second of them is convergence culture, which refer to a series of vacuum islands in the city of Berlin that define all that grid. No? So that in this plan specifically, everything that is black is positioned accordingly to its geographical position, but all the other islands are actually, they have a kind of little coordinates behind them, and they are all the vacuum empty spaces in the surrounding of on the station. No? So what we were doing in terms of commuting urbanisms, we were not just trying to define the mobility systems and the mobility strategies that were going to be operating in Berlin through the following 50 years. But what we were much more interested in were actually the type of spaces and the type of architectural devices that this infrastructure can generate and need for their functioning. No? So spaces and activities that kind of happen in the go or on the go. No? And again, we were doing kind of the same type of approach for the vacuum spaces. No? In this case, we were classifying the spaces in 4 categories: spaces that are just empty, spaces that are courtyards, spaces that are kind of in between infrastructures, and spaces that are kind of empty industrial spaces. And as you can see, and if we zoom into the plan, we were relying on this kind of abstract language in order to incorporate all these notions that somehow some of them are not so much formalistic or architectural from a formal approach, but they come from cultural or, in this case, infrastructural approaches. And I will go very quickly with the other 2 ones because I just wanted to emphasize kind of the overall strategy. So in the other 2 side projects, we were doing the same. Now in Tegel Airport, we were proposing kind of an axonometric which was showcasing how the project and the architectures of the projects and the different architectural elements were designed with a huge rendering. What we were emphasizing was much more on the materialization on it and on how it was going to be lived. No? In this case, we are working with 2 phenomenon. The first of them is Industry 4.0, so those type of industries and energy production strategies that are much more clean and that are not noisy and so on, that therefore can be incorporated back to the cities, which doesn't need to be out of the cities. So everything here, again, is the same strategy. Everything that is in black responds to Industry 4.0, and everything that is kind of white in here responds to another phenomenon that we call pop-up urbanisms or the architectures of the event, which is precisely what we have been doing in the design masterclass for 2 weeks, and we are going to be presenting here tomorrow. And in here, it was extremely interesting for us to kind of establish a juxtaposition and a balance between the extremely formal and static approach of industry with the extremely informal and non-static and dynamic approach of nightlife and festival life. So again, we were defining the same. We were not so much interested in the industry per se, but actually in the kind of spatial scenarios and architectural scenographies that this the introduction of this industry within the city can offer. And the same with the pop-up urbanisms. Now, in this case, it was extremely relevant in a city as Berlin, where kind of weekend societies and nightlife is so important, is so part of the culture, and has proved that the culture is not so much exclusively restricted in buildings such as the Berliner Philharmonic or the Jüdisch Museum, but has migrated to spaces such as Tempelhof or Berghain or this kind of other interesting spaces around the city. Again, if we zoom in into the plan, we can see this duality between the extremely formal approach to the metropolitanism of Industry 4.0 and the extremely informal metropolitanism of pop-up urbanisms. And finally, the last approach to the final, the third sub-project, which was in the outskirts of the city and operating with the suburbs. In here, we were trying to develop a little bit further the strategy that I showed in the project of Russia, in Gorodskoy Dom, in which we were trying to see how those strategies of mixing residential life or life and work together can inform and can offer a benefit for the suburbs, so that especially in cities such as Berlin, where the outskirts of the city and the suburb is extremely residential in a huge percentage of the areas, we wanted to incorporate some of the density and some of the variety of the city center, and by that we operated in a way that was kind of multi-scalar, and that we wanted to introduce with that strategy of the previous project within the urban blocks, within the residential blocks, some capsules that can coordinate, but also in a much wider kind of metropolitan and even territorial scale, big hubs of work and production. So in that sense, we developed further some of the strategies applied in the project before, but in this case, in a kind of in a bigger scale, which needed to offer a series of subtypologies. And we also started to identify new practices related to new types of work. So especially in this time, we were doing the project, part of the project within the confinement of COVID. So it was important to see how, for example, remote working and so on, that was not so much established before, it was kind of establishing, and that could offer a new urban paradigm. No? So and in that case, if we zoom in into the plan, we can see a little bit better that trans-scalarity or multi-scalarity between the tiny domesticated urbanisms that are injected into the residential block and the big hubs of production and work that are settled in the plan. No? So with this, I am finishing, and I am giving just a final comment, going back again to the idea of this kind of abstract language that somehow has been helping us to kind of refer and develop projects that deal much more with critical thinking and with research, and which also have allowed us to start producing installations in museums, but also a series of projects which deal with museography or the restoration of a museum that we are doing in Madrid, and also the strategies that we have been developing in projects that somehow we haven't built, such as the Gorodskoy Dom in Moscow, have been informing other scales of architecture that we are doing now with other type of pieces. And that language for us is extremely important, that kind of technical approach, because it's allowing us to inform the projects with a series of notions of material approach and sociological approach and ecological or economical approach that comes from the scale of the building to also the scales of the master plan, such as in this square that we designed 2 years ago in the south of Madrid, or to some of our most recent projects in which we are continuously establishing a critique to the type. In this case is the type of the kind of multipurpose hall, this was one of our most recent projects from this past year in Mexico, which was a multi-purpose hall that needed to host a series of musical events as well, but that through its structure and its layout configuration, we were also offering a possibility of transforming it into kind of an interior square or an interior public plaza, so that the building could be circulated all within its interior. And with this I end. Thanks very much. I hope that it was not too boring.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for a very inspiring lecture. I usually don't ask the first question, but I will tonight while some of our students think of a question. I give them some space during this first lecture. Since you ended with how you began with the notion of the abstract language, I guess I would just like to, I would like a little bit of a reflection, because so many of these, of the competitions that you showed, you've come in second. And so, you know, the kind of mythology would be that the second is always the one that should have won. And so I'm curious about a reflection about, do you think that this use of the abstract language, which always uses kind of design qualities as a speculative and planning device or action, becomes too complex for these public authorities, where, you know, they're used to seeing, you know, colored, volumetric abstractions that don't have the kind of life and richness that you propose. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about what that, because on the one hand, we would say, especially in architecture school, that the more detailed you draw this, the more the thing comes alive and you can activate imagination, because what you propose here is not always its fixed form, right? It's something that could change and always evolve, but you give it a kind of specificity to talk about how life could happen within these places. So let's say, so just to reflect here, I would just sort of to reiterate the question is, does the abstract language help or hinder you?
Yeah, totally. I think it totally works against us in the sense of competitions and market economy. So when we need to communicate both, maybe not so much in the early competition that we started doing, but in the last 5 years or 6 years, especially in COVID crisis, competitions have changed so much and are so much dependent on renderings, and especially in Europe, most of the competitions, they are driven by a jury which is not usually an expert jury of architects, but mostly it's mostly composed by a series of politicians and non-experts, and in that sense, the renderings have been kind of taking everything somehow, and then I think that the abstract language and the kind of very technical approach, usually in that sense, and also sometimes in the communication with private clients, which we don't have so much, but with the art scene that we are starting to work with, it also works against us. So we always have to be very careful with the type of language that is useful for us as a tool, as a practice, and also how do we communicate it for the audiences when we need to get a project or get a commission. So there is always that kind of oxymoron there as well, which I think that we try to incorporate into the language itself, and that's the reason that mainly we, for example, usually regardless of the kind of complexity of some projects, we try to kind of emphasize on certain ideas. No? So, for example, in this project, these drawings were double A0 panels. In here, we did a kind of a series of diagrams next to it, in which what we wanted to emphasize for the kind of main public was that they understood that the black was something and the white was something, and that it was mixed. No? So that the purely residential suburb was not necessarily residential, but could incorporate other type of qualities. Obviously, a kind of a more intellectual and informed audience could go and much farther in detail. So for us, what we have been also trying very strongly to work with is that regardless of the complexity of the abstract language, there is kind of a certain very basic kind of possibility to read it with very diagrammatic information. So it's I don't know if I'm answering the question, but somehow it's to kind of sum up the answer. It's against us, but we also deliberately are in favor of it and want to use it because it's useful for us as a practice, as a kind of a stubborn attitude.
Thank you. Questions?
I haven't completely made up my question, but going to that complexity of abstract thought and design, which very much carries into your graphics, and the process that I think the graphics make your work look very visual, the process behind it, designing all of this, and whilst it's a lot more comprehensible on the smaller scales like the fair or your theater, how does the detail and degree of design complexity carry throughout these scales, especially in your urban projects, which have obviously recurring motifs from your smaller scale projects? How does that carry over? Is there like a process which limits or expands?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. There is I would try to give like two answers. From a kind of more conceptual point of view, we don't care so much about scale in design, and that was part of the emphasis also of the lecture, to kind of show that we work with the same type of intensity in the kind of small projects of small size with a big project of big size, because for us it's just kind of a matter of intensity, no? So with the small projects we work with a complexity that deals more with the objects, and in the big projects we deal with a complexity that deals much more with kind of territorial elements. But somehow there is also, on the one hand, we work with that continuously with the same intensity, but then on the other hand, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years of the practice, there has been a kind of a multidirectional information exchange between the small projects and big projects, so that, as for example in the art fair, the kind of working with very small details and small materials is somehow defining the form of a kind of bigger elements, such as pavilions or elements of a wider range, and something like that also happens in the bigger scale. No, in this sense, in here with this project, just to give us an example, the definition of the architectural different types of the block, somehow they are defining kind of the urban or more metropolitan ethos of the master plan. And for us that's extremely important, no? So to continuously also jump between the scales and work from both the scales, so that, for example, when we were working at this project, we were not so much sure about the kind of bigger picture of it or the bigger strategy, and somehow in this case, for example, it came from the definition of the block itself as a kind of a smaller entity within it. I don't know if I have answered or...
No, exactly what I wanted to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. I had two questions in mind, but the first one was coming back to the competitions and also the way you draw and this abstraction you talked about. Seeing more and more of your drawings, we understand in a way it's a description of your art and yourself, and it's really a character. And talking about the fact that competitions are anonymous, in a way, aren't you presenting yourself via your drawings of who you are? Are you aware of this fine line, or is it not something that crosses your mind?
You mean that if they recognize if it is us when we present to a competition, no?
Yes.
That's the question. And if we are worried. So, I mean, for us, it's not something that is so much, I mean, that it's sometimes a kind of a concern, but it's not so much a worry because it's kind of a professional statement in that sense. So we do it regardless of being successful or not, or being kicked out of a competition or things like that. But obviously there is the anonymity. It's always an issue, and in that sense also somehow it is it's a kind of an ironic position because somehow the beginning of using this type of architectural representation was in fact a statement of being anonymous, so that we thought that it was a very generic type of language using just purely that does quality whatsoever, but somehow it has become quite non-anonymous. So I'm not sure if I am answering again the question or not.
No, you answered. And my second question would not be related to competitions at all, but throughout your drawings you reach an expression without using annotations at all. Did you ever felt the need, or for you the drawings are really expressive without this layer of annotations, of written definition and explanations?
So what can you repeat it? So do you mean that we don't use annotations or that we include annotations?
Do you use annotations, or do you really try to express it without using this extra layer? And if yes, how?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, an interesting question. So usually it really depends on the project. We try to use as less annotations as possible because also we try to make an effort that in this case, like the drawing itself is a tool and that can include the qualities and the understanding of what it is. So we usually believe and state constantly that the drawing has to kind of speak by itself. So it's something that has to be a kind of a common language, so that if you give it to somebody, needs to kind of recognize it. So in that sense, we don't try to use it, but sometimes it's obviously necessary, and we try to incorporate it into the language itself. And it's also a matter. I mean, it also works with this idea and approach of trying to address certain concerns or certain phenomena which are not sometimes understood as architectural, but that obviously we don't want to be kind of unique on that. This is kind of a common tendency right now of trying to include in architecture things that are ecological or whatever. But for us, it was also kind of a political statement within the discipline, because at the time that we started the practice 7 or 8 years ago, it was a moment of kind of blooming of this idea. But most of the architects that we had reference, which I am not going to name, they were using or incorporating these other non-architectural layers of information with a non-architectural type of language. So for us, that was a kind of it was like into the limit or a kind of a lack of braveness. No? So I want to talk about ecology, but I am going to do a collage. Or I am going to do kind of, no, so can you talk about ecology with a kind of a construction detail? Or can you talk about economy within a kind of black and white plan? So for us it was that was kind of the approach. So we were kind of slightly annoyed by the fact that there were many practices deliberately ignoring and denying architectural traditional or conventional representation. And we tried to kind of emphasize that.
Hi. So my question is, how do you think that this approach to a non-typological architecture influences and change the way how people perceive these spaces, and if this is a goal when you design a space?
So for us, it's not so much a goal, but it's kind of an attitude of reinforcement on something that is emerging or that is already happening. No, so in our cities, in the sense that we see certain phenomena and situations that are happening, but that somehow sometimes they are not so much included in the professional practice of architecture and urbanism. I mean, we are now, for giving an example, it's something that has been addressed with this project, but we are doing this kind of workshop with the Berlage dealing with the pop-up urbanisms on the architectures of the event. It's something that is extremely important in our societies. It is there. People kind of respect it. People understand that Glastonbury every year has a budget which is equal to a Herzog and de Meuron building. And in one edition of Glastonbury, you have 300,000 visitors, which are kind of the visitors of Caixa Forum of by Herzog and de Meuron in Madrid every 10 years. No? So the social success of these situations is obvious, it's accepted by society, but somehow Glastonbury doesn't have an architect behind designing it. So we have been looking into kind of other parts of our societies, and somehow they are a phenomenon that are kind of urban or that are architectural, but that somehow they have not been incorporated into the professional practice of architecture and urbanism, and that's part of the approach. No? So from our point of view, this idea of the critique of the typology, and this kind of title of non-typological urbanism or non-typological architecture, maybe it's not so much, it's too radical to say non-typological, but it's kind of the critique of the conventional or unconventional typological approach.
So you would say that it's more of a translation of patterns that are existing in our cities that are not,
and also kind of learning from the tools that they can offer us in order to incorporate them as tools of design of our projects.
Thank you.
Hello. I would like to ask how music influences your the production of architecture, since it's mentioned that you are also a contemporary musician.
I think that it has informed quite much in the sense of the kind of somehow what I was in two ways. I think that something that I was referring right now, this idea of that the documents that we produce and this kind of abstract language needs to be kind of understood or read by anyone. So I think that for me that's something inherited from music, in the same way as when you, not pop music, but kind of classical music or contemporary music, that you produce the score, and then the performance is something detached from it. No? So that the score is already, no? the score of a symphony of Shostakovich, it's already the song itself. It's already the art piece or the cultural piece, and then you can perform in several ways, and that's something else, no? So for us, that's also kind of reivindicates the idea of the plan as a project itself, regardless of being built or not being built, which also that's something that I actually learned at this school, because when I was studying here, I got introduced to kind of John Hedges and all of this kind of school. But then, on the other hand, also I think that in a much more methodological way, classical music education has offered a kind of an approach in which instead of, like many of practices nowadays, or most of the times, they are much more focused on building a how do you say it? So kind of building a company, no, or building something that is profitable. And for us, for me, I see it much more as a kind of a music production. So we tend to do projects and see opportunities to do projects which are competition, sometimes every day more and more, fortunately, private clients and so on. But regardless of the project kind of getting accomplished or not, for us, it's like the fact is doing the project, no? Regardless of getting it built or not. So for me, that comes from a kind of a musical attitude, no? So a musician composes music continuously. It's not he or she doesn't do the music for kind of getting a salary. It's a fact. It's a pure kind of vital act.
And another question would be, all your drawings are very impressive, of course, but it also seems that you treat them as a composition or as a scene that you want to depict. I would like to ask, what are the steps in this? What is the logic behind constructing a drawing? And how do you start? And when do you decide what will be shown in which way? What will be black? What will be a thicker line? Where will be more populated with elements?
So that's a complex question to answer. I think that it is with the project of Cyprus. I think that the whole explanation of it is kind of goes in parallel to the kind of methodology of the. So somehow I would say of the project it's also the methodology of the drawing. It's explained because for us the fact of constructing the drawing is not different from the fact of constructing the architectural project, because the abstract language and the architectural language is so much engaged with the architectural design that somehow they go in parallel. So somehow, as in that project, it's a constant jump between scales, from designing kind of gadgets and elements of the museography, which are kind of a one-to-one scale, to defining the form of the facade of the building or the structure, the grid of the structure of the rooftop. So somehow it's kind of the complexity is not so much intended, but it's something that is found jumping between scale. I think that in that case, it's something that I recognize that is totally inherited from Enric Miralles' kind of influence. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hello. I was looking at this drawing for a long time. I want to share the feeling first. I feel like this one, to me, it's more like a map than an architecture drawing. So my first question will be, do you imagine a physical boundary of your drawing, or do you have a boundary of your work, like where your work go? And the second one will be, because for the traditional architecture drawing, it's more focused on how it maintains itself, like logically or physically. And with this kind of drawing, how do you position yourself or your work, on which kind of level you put yourself more the effort?
So sorry, the first question was about, I didn't get it properly. So it's about the boundary of it.
Yeah. Like the physical boundary of the drawing.
So that they don't have, you are stating that they don't have boundary, and that it's like a map which is a portion of something else. Yeah. Okay, that's a very interesting question. So that's something that is intended. So we always try in most of our projects to kind of erase the border between the project and the city, and between what is designed and what is not designed. Because for us, that notion of understanding that architectural design and urban design are completely different disciplines that are on one side of the building and another side of the building, it's a kind of a mythology. You know? So in that sense, for us, the way that you design urbanism is exactly the same as you would design architecture and vice versa. And the second question was about?
Like you talk about 4 levels or 4 scales of the research or your drawing, and on which level you will put yourself the most effort, or how do you think about your approach?
So we don't really put more effort in one scale than in the other. I think that we find, that relates to the previous question, we find very interesting the jump between scales. So the projects that allow us to kind of mixed scales. They are the ones that we are more interested at. But obviously, we kind of try to design with the same intensity. Let's say, I was explaining here, no? It's from a very kind of a small kind of remake of Le Corbusier's Cabanon to kind of the restoration of a museum, or to small apartments of 60 square meters. So that somehow, if you see the plans of this device, somehow they are as complex as the plan of this museum of musical instruments in the west of Spain, or as the plan of a kind of a master plan. So for us, it's a matter of intensity and not so much of the scale itself.
Thank you.
Is that no?